HOA President Karen pepper sprayed my blind son simply because she couldn't bear the sight of his white cane. That terrible day, my 10-year-old Max was just playing in our front yard, using his cane to safely navigate his world of darkness. When we moved to this neighborhood, we thought we'd found the perfect home where our blind son could finally gain independence. We had no idea that the HOA Karen would hate our son because of his disability, seeing his white cane as an eyesore that threatened her perfect community. What happened next will shatter your heart. Hey, my name is David, and I never thought I'd be sharing a story like this. Our family, my wife Sarah, our 10-year-old son Max, and myself, had always faced challenges with grace. Max lost his sight when he was just 7 years old after a severe case of meningitis. After years of struggling with our old home's narrow doorways and dangerous stairs, we finally saved enough to move somewhere better suited for Max's needs. We found a charming house in a quiet suburban neighborhood with wide hallways and a single-floor layout, perfect for Max to navigate safely with his white cane. Moving day was filled with hope and excitement. The neighbors seemed friendly as they waved from their porches, and Max was thrilled about having a backyard where he could play safely. I remember the way his face lit up as he walked through our new home for the first time, his hands carefully mapping the walls and door frames, building his mental picture of our fresh start. "Dad, I think I'm really going to like it here," he said, his smile brighter than I'd seen in months. Little did we know our new neighbor would change our lives forever. She stood watching from across the street that very first day, clipboard in hand and a forced smile that didn't reach her eyes. Karen Miller, HOA president, self-appointed neighborhood guardian, and the woman who would soon turn our dream home into a nightmare. When Max was 7, our lives changed forever. What started as a typical childhood fever quickly spiraled into something far more serious, bacterial meningitis. The doctors worked tirelessly, but the infection had already done its damage. When Max finally opened his eyes after days in the hospital, they were vacant. The infection had taken his sight. "I can't see anything, Dad," he whispered, his small hand clutching mine. My heart shattered in that moment, but Max's spirit never did. Learning to navigate the world without sight was challenging, but Max tackled it with incredible determination. He mastered Braille within months, learned to use his white cane with precision, and adapted to a world of sounds and textures instead of colors and shapes. Despite his courage, our old home made his independence nearly impossible: steep stairs, narrow hallways, and unpredictable obstacles at every turn. "He deserves better than this," Sarah would say, watching Max struggle to move from room to room. We agreed. Max needed a home where his disability wouldn't be an additional burden. We spent months searching until we found the perfect place: a single-level house with wide doorways, open spaces, and a flat yard where Max could play safely. The neighborhood seemed peaceful, with good schools nearby and sidewalks where Max could practice walking with his cane. "This is it," Sarah whispered the first time we toured the house. "This is where Max can be free." We poured our savings into the down payment and planned modest renovations to make it even more accessible: textured pathways in the yard, handrails in strategic locations, and Braille labels throughout the house. We envisioned Max growing up in this space, gaining confidence and independence with each passing year. The move was exhausting but filled with hope. As we unpacked boxes and arranged furniture, Max explored every corner of our new home, his fingers tracing walls and memorizing the layout. His excitement was contagious. "I can get to the bathroom by myself," he announced proudly on our first night. "And I didn't bump into anything." Those small victories were everything to us. We finally felt like we were giving our son the life he deserved, a life where his blindness wouldn't hold him back. If only we had known what was waiting for us just across the street. 3 days after moving in, I was installing handrails along our front walkway when a sharp voice cut through the quiet morning air. "Excuse me, what exactly do you think you're doing to that property?" I looked up to see a woman standing at the edge of our driveway. She was in her mid-50s with perfectly styled blonde hair, wearing pressed khakis and a polo shirt with Pine Ridge HO embroidered on the chest. Her arms were crossed tightly, and she clutched a tablet to her side like a shield. "Just installing some handrails," I replied, trying to keep my tone friendly. "I'm David, by the way. We just moved in." She didn't offer her hand or her name. Instead, her eyes narrowed as she looked at the handrails, then at the tactile markers I'd already placed along the edge of the walkway. "Those modifications weren't approved by the Homeowners Association," she said flatly. "I'm Karen Miller, HOA president. All exterior changes require prior approval." Before I could respond, Max came out the front door, his white cane tapping carefully in front of him. "Dad," he called. "Mom wants to know if you want lemonade." Karen's expression changed instantly. Her eyes widened and she took a small step back as if Max's blindness might be contagious. Then her face formed a smile that didn't match the coldness in her eyes. "Oh, I didn't realize," she said, her voice suddenly dripping with fake sweetness. "How unfortunate." Max, sensitive to tones of voice, tilted his head slightly. "Hello," he said politely. "Are you our neighbor?" Karen didn't address him directly. Instead, she turned back to me, lowering her voice. "The thing is, this neighborhood has certain aesthetic standards. These modifications are quite unusual. They affect property values." I felt my jaw tighten. "These modifications are necessary for my son's safety and independence. We have all the proper permits." "Permits from the city, perhaps," Karen replied, waving her hand dismissively. "But HOA approval is different. We care about maintaining a certain look in Pine Ridge." Sarah appeared at the door behind Max, immediately sensing the tension. She came down the steps and placed a protective hand on Max's shoulder. "Is everything okay out here?" she asked. Karen's smile stretched wider, more artificial. "Just explaining some of our community guidelines. Your special situation doesn't exempt you from the rules." She emphasized the word special with barely disguised distaste. She handed me a thick binder labeled Pine Ridge Homeowners Association Guidelines and turned to leave. "I'll expect your modification request forms by Friday. The committee meets monthly, so you'll need to remove these unauthorized installations until they're properly approved." As she walked away, she called over her shoulder, "Welcome to Pine Ridge." Max waited until she was out of earshot before asking, "Dad, why doesn't she like us?" I exchanged glances with Sarah, whose face mirrored my concern. This wasn't just about handrails and rules. Something in Karen's eyes told me this was just the beginning. "Some people just need time to warm up, buddy," I said, ruffling his hair. But inside, I knew we just met someone who would make our fresh start much harder than we ever anticipated. The next few weeks became a pattern of Karen's increasingly obvious hostility. What started as passive-aggressive comments quickly evolved into something more sinister. I continued with our accessibility modifications despite Karen's objections. We needed the handrails and tactile markers for Max's safety, and I wasn't about to wait months for some committee to decide whether my blind son deserved to navigate our own property safely. Every morning when I worked outside, Karen would happen to walk by. She'd stop, take photos with her phone, and make notes on her tablet. At first, she'd offer a tight-lipped "good morning," but eventually she dropped even that pretense. One afternoon, while Max was practicing walking the perimeter of our yard with his cane, I noticed Karen standing at the edge of her driveway, watching with obvious disgust. "It's disturbing," I overheard her telling another neighbor loudly enough for us to hear. "Children like that should be in special facilities, not in full view where they make everyone uncomfortable." My blood boiled, but I bit my tongue. Max didn't need to hear me arguing with a neighbor. A week later, an official letter from the HOA appeared in our mailbox. It cited multiple violations: the handrails, the textured pathway markers, even the wind chimes we'd hung to help Max orient himself in the yard. Sarah called the HOA office to explain our situation, emphasizing that these were necessary accessibility modifications protected under the Fair Housing Act. The representative seemed understanding, but the next day Karen was back. This time she brought 2 other HOA board members to our front door. "We've reviewed your situation," Karen said, not bothering with pleasantries. "While we sympathize with your circumstances, our guidelines exist for a reason. The modifications you've made are affecting neighborhood aesthetics." One of the other board members looked uncomfortable, avoiding eye contact. The third just nodded along with Karen. "These aren't decorative choices," Sarah responded firmly. "They're necessary accommodations for our son's disability. The law protects our right to make reasonable modifications." Karen's face hardened. "Don't lecture me about the law. This isn't about your son's disability. It's about following rules that everyone else manages to follow." As they turned to leave, Karen added, "And keep that cane of his from touching other people's lawns. Some residents have complained about him trespassing." Max hadn't gone near anyone else's property. He was always with one of us when outside, carefully staying within our yard. The harassment escalated further when Karen began calling city inspectors to our house, claiming we were doing unpermitted work. 3 different inspectors came over 2 weeks, each time confirming our modifications were properly permitted and compliant with code. The final straw came when we received a certified letter threatening legal action if we didn't remove all unauthorized modifications within 7 days. "This is getting ridiculous," Sarah said that night after Max had gone to bed. She's targeting us specifically because of Max's disability. I nodded, the weight of it all settling on my shoulders. I know. I think we need to talk to a lawyer. What we didn't realize was that Karen's bullying was about to cross a line that would change everything. It was a beautiful Saturday afternoon in October. The kind of perfect fall day that makes you grateful for simple pleasures, leaves crunching underfoot, cool breezes carrying the scent of wood smoke and children's laughter floating through the air. Max was in our front yard enjoying the sunshine. We'd set up a sensory play area for him, wind chimes hanging from a small wooden frame, a sandbox with different textured objects buried inside for him to discover, and his favorite bench where he could sit and listen to the neighborhood sounds. He was kneeling by the sandbox, his fingers carefully sifting through the sand, his face lit up with concentration as he searched for the hidden treasures. I was on the porch watching him while fixing a loose board on the railing. Sarah had gone to the store for groceries, promising to bring back Max's favorite ice cream if he practiced his cane skills before she returned. It was peaceful, ordinary, and perfect. Then I heard the angry clacking of heels on the sidewalk. Karen was marching toward our yard, her face flushed with anger. She was dressed in her usual HOA uniform polo shirt, pressed khakis, and an expression of utter contempt. But this time something was different. There was a frantic energy to her movements, a wild look in her eyes that made me immediately uneasy. "Hey!" she shouted at Max, "You! Get away from there!" Max froze, his hands still in the sandbox, his head tilting in confusion at the harsh voice. "I'm sorry," he called out, unsure where to direct his response. "Am I doing something wrong?" I was already moving off the porch, but Karen reached him before I could. "This is a violation of at least 3 HOA regulations," she spat, standing over Max. "Unauthorized play equipment, improper lawn ornaments, and that dash," she gestured wildly at the wind chimes. "That noisemaker is a public nuisance." Max stood up slowly, reaching for his cane which was propped against the bench. "I'm sorry, ma'am. I didn't mean to break any rules. This is our yard, though." "Don't be smart with me," Karen snapped. "Your family has been nothing but trouble since you moved in. Always wanting special treatment, bending all the rules." I was only a few feet away now. "Karen, that's enough. You're speaking to a child." "My child." She whirled toward me, but her eyes darted back to Max, who was now standing with his cane, clearly uncomfortable and trying to orient himself amid the tension. "Your child is trespassing," she said, her voice rising hysterically. "He's in our yard, Karen," I said firmly, trying to keep my voice calm despite the anger surging through me. "You need to leave. Now." "This isn't just your property," she insisted. "The HOA has jurisdiction over the front yards. And I'm telling you he's violating our policies." Max took a step toward the sound of my voice, his cane sweeping in front of him. The tip of it brushed against Karen's shoe. What happened next occurred so quickly I barely had time to react. Karen jumped back as if she'd been burned. "He attacked me," she shrieked, fumbling in her purse. "He's attacking me with that stick." Before I could explain, before I could move to protect my son, Karen pulled out a small canister. Her hand shook with rage or fear or some toxic combination of both. "Karen, no!" I shouted, lunging forward. But I was too late. Karen pressed the button and sprayed Max directly in the face with pepper spray. The sound that came from my son will haunt me forever. It was a scream of pure pain and confusion, a child who couldn't see, now engulfed in burning agony, with no understanding of why or how. He dropped his cane and clutched at his eyes, crying out for me. "Daddy, it burns. Help me. I can't see. I can't see." The cruel irony of those words from my already blind son broke something inside me. I rushed to Max, pulling him into my arms as he sobbed and gasped. His face was red and swelling, tears streaming down his cheeks as he clawed desperately at his eyes. "What have you done?" I roared at Karen, who stood there, pepper spray still in hand, her face a disturbing mixture of satisfaction and manufactured fear. "He attacked me," she repeated, but her voice was smaller now. "I was defending myself. He came at me with that stick. Everyone saw it. But no one had seen it her way. Because Karen hadn't noticed the neighbor across the street, watering his garden. Hadn't noticed his security camera pointed directly at our front yard. Hadn't noticed him drop his hose and run toward us, phone already in hand, calling 911. "I got it all on video," he shouted, pointing to his house. "I saw everything. She attacked a blind child." Karen's face went pale. For the first time since we'd met her, she seemed to realize she had crossed a line from which there would be no return. "Help him. Somebody help my son." I cried out, holding Max gently as he twisted in pain. My hands shook as I tried to wipe the burning spray from his face, but everything I did seemed to make it worse. His screams had turned to whimpers. Our neighbor Tom rushed over with a gallon of milk. "Here, use this. It helps neutralize the pepper spray." He uncapped the jug and helped me pour it gently over Max's face. The milk ran down his cheeks and soaked his shirt, but the relief was almost immediate. Max's breathing steadied slightly, though he continued to tremble in my arms. "It's okay, buddy, I'm right here," I whispered, holding him close. "The burning will stop soon. You're safe now." Karen stood frozen a few feet away, still clutching the pepper spray canister. As the reality of what she'd done seemed to sink in, her expression shifted from righteous indignation to something resembling fear. But not remorse, never remorse. "He came at me with his stick," she repeated, her voice now uncertain. "I was just defending myself." Tom stepped toward her, his face tight with anger. "That stick is a blind child's cane and you know it. You just pepper sprayed a disabled kid in his own front yard. I have the whole thing on video." Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder by the second. Karen's eyes darted toward her house, as if calculating whether she could make a run for it. "Don't even think about it," Tom warned, holding up his phone. "I've already sent the video to my wife. It's backed up." Within minutes, our quiet street was bathed in the flashing lights of police cars and an ambulance. The paramedics rushed to Max, gently taking him from my arms to assess his condition. I stayed close, murmuring reassurances as they worked. "Dad, am I in trouble?" Max asked between pained breaths, his small hand searching for mine. "No, buddy. You did nothing wrong," I assured him, squeezing his hand. "Nothing at all." Two police officers approached Karen, who had composed herself enough to launch into her version of events. "Officers, I'm the HOA president here. This family has been violating community guidelines since they moved in. Today the boy threatened me with his cane and I feared for my safety." The taller officer listened impassively before turning to Tom. "You said you have video of the incident?" Tom nodded and played the footage on his phone. The officer's expression hardened as he watched. "Ma'am, please put the pepper spray on the ground and step back," the officer instructed Karen, his hand moving to his handcuffs. "This is ridiculous. Do you know who I am in this community?" Karen protested, her voice rising hysterically. "Ma'am, I won't ask again. Put down the pepper spray." Finally, Karen complied, dropping the canister with a clatter. The officer picked it up as evidence while his partner began reading Karen her rights. "Karen Miller, you're under arrest for assault and battery of a minor. You have the right to remain silent." The look of utter disbelief on Karen's face as the handcuffs clicked around her wrists would have been satisfying under different circumstances. But all I could focus on was Max, my little boy, being loaded onto a stretcher. "I need to go with my son," I told the officers, already moving toward the ambulance. "Of course, sir. We'll need your statement, but that can wait. An officer will meet you at the hospital." As the ambulance doors closed, I caught a glimpse of Karen being placed in the back of a police car, still protesting loudly. Neighbors had gathered on the sidewalk, watching in shocked silence, some recording with their phones. At that moment, Sarah's car turned onto our street. She slammed on the brakes at the sight of police cars and an ambulance, abandoning her vehicle half in the road as she ran toward us. "David." "Max." "What happened?" she cried, her face pale with fear. I met her halfway, pulling her into a quick embrace. "It's Karen. She pepper-sprayed Max. They're taking him to the hospital now." Sarah's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with horror. "She what? Our Max? But why?" "She claimed he was trespassing in our own yard," I said, the words sounding as insane spoken aloud as they had been to witness. "Come on, we need to go with him." As we climbed into the ambulance, I looked back at our house, the home that was supposed to be our fresh start, our safe haven. In the distance, I could still hear Karen's indignant protests as the police car door closed. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. But as I held Max's hand while the paramedics continued to flush his eyes, I made a silent promise. Karen would face justice for what she'd done to my son. This time she had gone too far. The weeks following the attack were a whirlwind of medical appointments, police statements, and meetings with our lawyer. Max's eyes eventually healed, though the psychological wounds ran deeper. Nightmares about the angry lady became common, and he was hesitant to play in the front yard, even with us right beside him. Meanwhile, Karen's actions had unleashed consequences she clearly never anticipated. The video of her assaulting Max spread throughout the neighborhood, then to local social media groups, and finally caught the attention of local news. The headline HOA President Pepper Sprays Blind Child appeared on screens across the city. The district attorney is taking this very seriously, our lawyer Michelle told us during our first meeting. The video evidence is irrefutable, and they're considering additional hate crime charges due to the targeted nature of the assault on a disabled child. Karen was released on bail the day after her arrest, but her troubles were only beginning. The HOA board called an emergency meeting and voted unanimously to remove her as president. Several of the board members visited us personally to apologize, admitting they'd been intimidated by Karen for years. She's always been difficult, one elderly board member confessed, but we never imagined she'd do something like this. We're so sorry we didn't stand up to her sooner. 2 weeks after the incident, we received an unexpected letter from the HOA board, officially approving all our accessibility modifications and waiving any future application fees for disability-related changes. It was a small victory amid the chaos. When the day of the preliminary hearing arrived, we walked into the courthouse with Max between us, his small hand gripping mine tightly. Our lawyer had prepared us for what to expect, but nothing could ready me for the sight of Karen sitting at the defense table, dressed in a conservative suit that couldn't disguise the cold fury in her eyes. As the charges were read, assault and battery of a minor, assault on a disabled person and criminal harassment, Karen sat stone-faced, occasionally whispering to her attorney. But when the prosecutor played Tom's video for the court, the collective gasp from the gallery seemed to pierce through her armor of indifference. The footage was even more damning on the large courtroom screen. It captured everything: Max peacefully playing in our yard, Karen storming up to confront him, his cane accidentally brushing her shoe as he tried to orient himself, and her immediate violent response, pepper spraying a blind child directly in the face without provocation or warning. When it was Max's turn to testify, the judge spoke to him gently, making sure he was comfortable before proceeding. My heart swelled with pride as Max bravely recounted what happened, his voice small but steady. I was just playing in my sandbox. I heard someone yelling but I couldn't see who it was. I stood up and tried to find my dad with my cane, and then suddenly my face was burning really bad. I didn't know what was happening. I was scared. Several jurors wiped tears from their eyes as Max spoke. Even the court reporter paused to compose herself. Then came Karen's testimony, a disaster for her defense. Rather than showing remorse, she doubled down, insisting she had felt threatened by a stick-wielding trespasser, and had every right to defend herself. When the prosecutor pointed out that the trespasser was a blind 10-year-old boy in his own yard, Karen's response shocked the courtroom. If they can't control their special needs child, they shouldn't let him outside unsupervised, she snapped. Her own attorney visibly winced. The judge, who had maintained professional neutrality throughout the proceedings, fixed Karen with a hard stare. Ms. Miller, are you suggesting that children with disabilities should be kept out of public view? Karen must have sensed the trap but couldn't help herself. I'm saying that normal neighborhoods shouldn't have to accommodate every person's special problems. Property values matter. An audible murmur rippled through the courtroom. The prosecutor simply nodded and said, "No further questions, Your Honor." The trial lasted 3 days, but the jury deliberated for less than 2 hours before returning with their verdict: guilty on all counts. When the judge prepared to announce the sentence, Karen stood stiffly, still seemingly unable to comprehend the reality of her situation. "Ms. Miller," the judge began, "your actions were not only criminal but demonstrate a disturbing lack of basic humanity. You assaulted a disabled child because his very existence offended your sense of what belongs in your neighborhood." The judge paused, looking directly at Karen over her reading glasses. "I sentence you to 5 years in state prison, with a minimum of 3 years to be served before possibility of parole. Additionally, you will pay $75,000 in damages to the family, complete 200 hours of community service specifically with organizations serving disabled individuals, and upon release, you will be prohibited from serving on any homeowners association board or similar position of authority for life." Karen's face drained of color. But that's excessive. I was just enforcing the rules." "Remove the defendant," the judge ordered, ignoring Karen's protests. As the bailiff led Karen away, she looked back at us one last time. The hatred in her eyes had been replaced by something else: disbelief that her actions had consequences, that her power had limits, that justice had finally caught up with her. Outside the courthouse, reporters gathered, asking for statements. We politely declined, wanting only to take Max home and begin the process of healing. But Tom, our neighbor who had captured the video, spoke briefly to the cameras. This neighborhood stands for kindness and inclusion, he said firmly. What happened to Max was a tragedy, but it brought the rest of us together. We're better than what Karen Miller represents and we're going to prove it. As we drove home, Max leaned his head against my shoulder in the backseat. Is the angry lady going away for a long time? He asked softly. Yes, buddy, I answered, wrapping my arm around him. She can't hurt you anymore. Good, he said simply. Can I play in the sandbox tomorrow? Sarah caught my eye in the rearview mirror, tears mingling with her smile. Absolutely, I told him. It's your yard, Max. It always was. The morning after the sentencing, I woke to the sound of voices outside. Still groggy, I peeked through the blinds and couldn't believe what I saw. At least 20 neighbors had gathered on our front lawn, carrying tools, plants, and building materials. What's going on? Sarah asked, joining me at the window. I have no idea, I replied, quickly pulling on some clothes. When I stepped outside, Tom approached with a wide smile. Hope we didn't wake you too early. What is all this? I gestured to the crowd. Well, Tom explained, we've been talking as a neighborhood. What happened to Max wasn't just Karen's failure, it was ours too. We should have been more welcoming from the start, more understanding of your family's needs. He handed me a rolled-up paper. So we made some plans. I unrolled what turned out to be a detailed blueprint for an accessible sensory garden, designed specifically for Max. It included raised garden beds at wheelchair height. Though Max didn't use a wheelchair, the height would be perfect for him. Wind chimes, fragrant plants labeled with braille markers, a water feature with different sound patterns, and textured pathways that would help him navigate independently. The whole neighborhood contributed, explained an elderly woman I recognized from down the street. My grandson is autistic and I know how much a sensory space helps him. I thought Max might enjoy something similar. I was speechless, tears welling in my eyes. Sarah came outside with Max, who tilted his head curiously at the sounds of so many people. What's happening, Dad? He asked. Tom knelt down to Max's level. Hey Max. It's Tom from across the street. We're all here to build you a special garden where you can play and explore. Would that be okay with you? Max's face lit up. For me? Really? Really, Tom confirmed. And we were hoping you could help us design it. Tell us what you'd like to feel and smell and hear in your garden. What followed was one of the most beautiful days of our lives. The entire neighborhood worked together, following Max's suggestions and ideas. Children helped Max plant fragrant herbs, learning from him how to distinguish plants by touch and smell. Retired engineers created a system of textured pathways that would help Max navigate the space independently. A local artist donated wind chimes tuned to different pleasing scales. As they worked, neighbors shared stories with us, many revealing that they too had felt intimidated by Karen over the years. She fined me for having my grandson's tricycle visible in my driveway, one woman told Sarah. Called it unsightly equipment. She reported my holiday decorations 3 years in a row, added another. Said they weren't tasteful enough for the neighborhood standards. It became clear that Karen's reign of terror had affected many families, though none as severely as ours. Her arrest and conviction had lifted a cloud that had hung over the community for years. By late afternoon, the sensory garden was taking shape. Max explored it with wonder, his fingers tracing the different textures, his face lighting up at each new discovery. Dad, feel this, he called excitedly, running his hands over a mosaic wall with raised patterns. And listen. He stood near the wind chimes, his head tilted appreciatively as they sang in the breeze. The transformation wasn't limited to our yard. Over the following weeks, something remarkable happened in our neighborhood. The rigid adherence to HOA rules relaxed. Children's laughter, once hushed for fear of noise complaints, now filled the streets. Gardens became more personal, more creative. Neighbors introduced themselves, organized block parties, and created a community text group to share news and offer help. One day, a for sale sign appeared in front of Karen's house. No one was surprised. She wouldn't be returning to the neighborhood after her release, and her family wanted no part of the property's notorious history. 2 months later, a young couple with twin toddlers moved in. We brought them welcome cookies, introducing ourselves and Max. We've heard so much about this neighborhood, the wife said warmly. About how everyone comes together to support each other. It's exactly what we wanted for our kids. I didn't have the heart to tell them the full story of how that community spirit had been forged through adversity. Perhaps someday, but not then. Instead, we invited them to a neighborhood barbecue that weekend. Max's recovery continued in ways both physical and emotional. The nightmares gradually subsided. With the help of a therapist who specialized in trauma and children with disabilities, he regained his confidence and independence. The sensory garden became his favorite place, not just to play but to invite friends. Yes, friends. For the first time since his blindness, Max was surrounded by children who saw him not as different, but as someone with unique abilities and perspectives. The neighborhood kids regularly knocked on our door, asking if Max could come out to play. They adapted their games to include him, learning from him as much as he learned from them. 6 months after the incident, Max reached a milestone that brought tears to my eyes. He walked to Tom's house all by himself, navigating with his cane along the sidewalk that the neighborhood had collaboratively modified with subtle textural cues that only he could detect. When he returned home, his face was flushed with pride. "I did it, Dad. All by myself." That night, as I tucked him into bed, Max said something that will stay with me forever. "Dad," he whispered, "I'm glad we live here now." "Me too, buddy," I replied, my throat tight with emotion. "Even with what happened with the angry lady?" he asked. I paused, considering his question carefully. "Sometimes," I said finally, "bad things lead to good changes. What she did was terrible, but look at all the wonderful people we've met because of it. Look at your amazing garden and all your new friends." Max nodded thoughtfully. "I think," he said slowly, "that the bad part is over and now we just get the good parts." Out of the mouth of babes, as they say. Max, in his simple wisdom, had captured exactly what had happened. Karen's cruelty had been the catalyst for creating something beautiful. A community that rallied around a blind child and his family, that recognized the value of diversity and inclusion, that became stronger and more compassionate because of our presence, not in spite of it. As Max drifted off to sleep, I stood in the doorway watching him. My son, who had faced darkness both literal and figurative, and emerged with his light still shining brightly. My son, who had taught an entire neighborhood what true strength looks like. My son, who was finally truly home. Looking back at everything our family endured, I can't help but reflect on the power of standing up against injustice. When Karen pepper sprayed my blind son that day, she thought her position of authority would protect her. She believed she was untouchable, that the rules didn't apply to her. She was wrong. The moment justice was served in that courtroom wasn't just a victory for Max. It was a message to everyone who thinks they can bully, harass, and harm others without consequences. Karma catches up to cruel people, often when they least expect it. Karen's life unraveled completely because of her own actions. From HOA president to prison inmate. From respected community leader to notorious child abuser. From property value protector to someone who couldn't even sell her own home without stigma. Her downfall was entirely self-inflicted, the perfect definition of karma. Our family emerged stronger from this ordeal. Max, who once asked if he should stay inside to avoid bothering the neighbors, now confidently explores his sensory garden and walks to friends' houses independently. Sarah and I, who once questioned our decision to move here, now cannot imagine living anywhere else. But the most profound transformation happened in our community. Karen's cruelty unintentionally united the neighborhood in ways we never expected. Her absence allowed kindness to flourish where fear once reigned. What she meant for harm ultimately created a haven of acceptance and support. As Max told me that night, the bad part is over and now we just get the good parts. If you're facing your own Karen right now, someone who bullies you because you're different, someone who abuses their power, someone who makes you feel unwelcome in your own space, remember our story. Stand firm. Seek help. Document everything. And know that justice, while sometimes slow, has a way of finding those who deserve it. No one has the right to make you feel unwelcome in this world because of who you are or what you need. Not a neighbor. Not an HOA president. Not anyone. If our story touched you today, please like and subscribe for more real-life accounts of standing up to injustice and the powerful karma that follows. Your support helps us share these important messages with others who might need to hear them. Thank you for listening to our journey. From our family to yours, never lose hope and never stop believing in justice.